a little more gloomy of a question.
Uh-oh.
Given that infrastructure is the cornerstone of our capacity for innovation and economic prosperity, how are you and the Biden administration working to keep our transportation sector and infrastructure secure and safe from our adversaries and non-state actors?
Great question, one that we definitely talk about a lot in this administration. And a lot of it is recognizing that there are both conventional, traditional threats and novel ones. For example, the bigger percentage of the value of a car becomes the computer, and that's getting bigger and bigger. The more you got to worry about cyber threats to that car, especially as it's not just transmitting telematics out there, but in some cases receiving signals that if it's getting the wrong signals, that's a really troubling thing. Here's the real challenge. We don't actually run most transportation systems at the federal level. The big exception is aviation. So with FAA, there's a whole set of things to protect the national airspace because we literally run the air traffic system. But we don't run highways. We fund them. We don't run railroads. We regulate them. And as the Colonial Pipeline incident, which is the first time I got a phone call from the Situation Room since I got this job, as that showed us or reminded us, most of the critical infrastructure in this country is in private and or local hands, which means that it's not just a question about what we do federally to be a tougher target and batten down the hatches. We're doing that in the federal enterprise. But how do we engage the many, many local owners of infrastructure, make sure they are harder targets, make sure they know what their responsibilities are and their vulnerabilities are, and do it all without necessarily being able to read them in on all the threats that we're made aware of, although there are also ways to help make them more aware of some of the things that come in through the intelligence community. So it's a live concern, only becoming more so as some of these forms of technology that not everybody even completely understands play a bigger and bigger role in this. But what I can tell you is that very, very good people are on it.
You know, one of the questions Mike was talking about before, and we haven't really hit upon it, was East Palestine and what's been done in the follow-up to that. And I noticed just the other day that we're changing the rules about number of people on these long trains and so forth. So.
Yeah, so let me talk about what's been done. Let me talk then about the unfinished business. And I'll try to be brief, but it's hard because I'm pretty fired up about this. What's been done, tons of focused inspections, safety reviews and audits of all the major railroad companies, a real push on the conditions for workers, including going from about 5% to about 87% of union workers having access to sick leave in the railroading industry, advancements on technology rulemakings, including a rule, the one you referenced, where you might be amazed to know this is not already a rule, but we issued a rule saying that generally on a train, especially a 2-mile long freight train, you got to have more than one person on board. Believe it or not, this was not a rule.
2 miles is how many cars?
I got to think of the mental math on that. We're talking about trains with more than 100 cars.
Yeah,
often.
right.
So you might want to have more than 2 people on board. There were 3 people on board the train in East Palestine, and I think that fact may have been part of why nobody lost their life. I don't want to get ahead of any investigation still underway, but it matters to have people ready to respond. And 2 of the large Class 1 railroads immediately sued us, saying that we've gone way too far, way out of line, suggesting you got to have more than one human being on board a train. So all of which brings me to the unfinished business, which is that the Railway Safety Act is waiting its turn in Congress and has been since shortly after East Palestine, bipartisan, sponsored by J.D. Vance and Sherrod Brown both. It's got a bipartisan counterpart in the House, and it's just sitting there. And some of the same members of Congress who had a lot to say about East Palestine in the weeks after it happened are today completely ignoring the demands from leaders in East Palestine and elsewhere to finally pass this legislation that would, among other things, codify that minimum crew size so that it wasn't subject to some of the vulnerabilities. I recently learned that actually a member of Congress sponsored legislation to dismantle that 2-person crew rule that we just put out already. But also things like fines. If we catch a railroad company in an egregious safety violation that gets somebody killed, the stiffest fine we can assess is in the neighborhood of $225,000. This is for a multi-billion-dollar company in one of the most profitable industries on earth. Not enough to change their behavior. The law would fix that. So my point is, I'm proud of the work that has been done in response to that horrible situation. But if we really want to do right by the people who live in East Palestine and anybody else who lives anywhere near a rail line, including an awful lot of people in South Bend, Indiana, where I grew up, Congress needs to get off the dime and pass this bill.
We have 3 minutes left, Mike. Do you have a final question?
No,
or
let's
take
go to
one
the,
more.
Let's go to the audience.
All right, we'll go in the middle here.
Thank you, Secretary Buttigieg. I'm with the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO, and one of our primary issues of concern right now is Schedule F and efforts that we're likely to see under a future administration who tries to further politicize the federal civil service. And so I'd love to know what you would consider to be some of the threats, not to public servants, but to the public that we are likely to see in terms of all of the services and benefits that we all rely on under such a patronage policy. And also, if you were speaking to ordinary citizens who are more susceptible to believing in drain the swamp politics, what would you most want them to know?
I mean, really what I'd want them to know is the kind of people who work at a place like the USDOT. And out of the 55,000 employees we have, I think about 100 are political appointees, and the rest are career civil servants, public servants, from air traffic controllers to trucking inspectors to the people who run down the complaints if your airline stiffs you out of a refund, to geographers at the Federal Rail Administration. And what they do saves lives every day. And they do it without regard to politics. And I will say, you know, we were certainly not hit as hard as a department as some others by the ideological intensity of some previous administrations, but I will say that the very important parts of our department, including the Departmental Office of Civil Rights, which among other things makes sure that if your house is in the path of a proposed highway expansion and is about to be removed for that reason, that your rights are respected. Doing pretty important work, and that office was not exactly being given the resources it needed when we got here. So this stuff does matter. I actually like that many dimensions of transportation don't have an obvious ideological valence. But as we've learned, just about anything can become ideological. We saw that with public health. And certain things that to me are just basic questions of transportation safety, like railroad regulation or vehicle regulation, or paying attention to the environmental implications of what we do, are at stake. A lot of all the way down to the language, whether you're allowed to use the word climate in scientific documents that are literally about the environmental impact of our transportation systems. But the other thing I would point to is the results that these civil servants working without regard to party politics have achieved. And again, there's a long way to go. But you take again the case of aviation safety, right? Where it is difficult to think of any product from a cheeseburger to a toaster that has been subjected to a higher level of rigor and therefore has a higher number of people who have safely used it than the standard that we have achieved and are fighting to maintain for something like commercial airliners, and we've got to maintain that.
I think you can hear from this kind of conversation with the Secretary that the job of Transportation Secretary is one of those that involves scores of disciplines. So you're talking about aviation, you're talking about ports, infrastructure, automobiles, AI, you're talking about safety, you're talking about the environment. It really requires somebody who is a kind of polymath to be able to do it fluently, and I think we're all very fortunate to have somebody like Secretary Buttigieg doing this, and want to thank you for joining us. We're going to keep doing these things every few weeks with other members of the cabinet and other folks we think you should meet. If you're listening to this on one of our podcasts and you want to come to one of those, email us. We're doing one in September, I know, with Secretary Blinken, and we did one in December with Jake Sullivan of the NSC, and we've got others coming. So if you're interested, join us. If you're here and you want to come back at one of them, let somebody know on your way out. But for now, on behalf of Mike and the New Republic and myself and the DSR Network, I want to thank you for coming, and I'd like you all to join me in thanking Secretary Buttigieg for such a great conversation.